Hello, and thank you for joining me for my first brief dance history lesson. Today I'm going to be talking about Louis XIV and the origins of classical ballet. Born in 1638, Louis XIV ascended to the throne at the young age of 4. He would go on to become Europe's longest reigning monarch, with over 72 years on the throne at the time of his death in 1715. He is remembered for centralizing the French government, abolishing Protestants' rights, starting many wars, and contributing to the origins of classical ballet. Being a patron of the arts may not seem like it fits with that list, but in fact it was a vital part of how he ran his court. When Louis was 10 and his mother was still regent for him, there was an uprising of the nobilities against the monarchy. The rebels drove Louis and his mother out of Paris, and the country fell into a civil war. At the end of the conflict, those loyal to the crown prevailed, and Louis returned to Paris at the age of 14 with a very different outlook on the aristocracy. He now assumed that all of them were just biding their time, waiting to seize power for themselves. This led to him stripping them of most of their powers and fashioning himself as an absolute monarch. Having little taste for Paris, Louis converted one of his father's hunting lodges into the extravagant palace of Versailles. And in a move to keep his friends close and potential enemies closer, Louis relocated his court to the isolated palace. He would invite the nobility to stay with him there, and then not let them leave. Versailles became a gilded prison for the elite, with every moment of their time becoming as choreographed as a dance. Strict etiquette rules were put into place for everything from where you could sit or stand to how you entered or exited a room. If he distracted them with constantly having to keep up with complex etiquette in order to maintain their position at court, then they didn't have time to plot behind his back. And a major part of life at court was dance. There would be social dancing before every meal, and all the courtiers needed to know the ins and outs of at least a dozen of the most current, popular dances, each with unique, complex patterns of footwork and movement that needed to be memorized. What would go on to become ballet started its life in 15th century Italy as a court social dance. It was essentially elegant walking in patterns around the floor. Over time, it evolved from simple to much more complex footwork, and traveled across Europe, becoming the precursor to ballet known as French Noble style. The French Noble style of Baroque dance is what Louis studied as a child, and in an effort to appear every bit the divine ruler, the young Louis dedicated himself to perfecting his physique. He trained daily in fencing, horseback riding, and dance in order to present himself as a force to be reckoned with. At the time, ballet had a very different reputation than it does in our modern world. Court dances were only allowed to be danced by men, and it was seen as a masculine display of physical prowess, as well as a great tool for propaganda. When the young king was 14, Louis made his debut in the court ballets, coinciding with his mother stepping down as regent. Louis was often given the leading roles, especially if the characters were royalty or gods. This was, of course, a tool for propaganda, displaying him for all the world to see as a divine ruler. It was also a way for him to assert himself above the nobles who were dancing alongside him, by having them literally worship him in choreography. Even though it was a propaganda tool, it is believed that based on the sheer number of performances he did, and the fact that he would take on smaller roles in some scenes, that he actually enjoyed performing. His most famous performance came in 1653, when the 16-year-old Louis played Apollo, the Greek god of the sun, in a production titled Le Ballet de la Nuit, or the Ballet of the Night. The extravagance of his golden costume was not soon forgotten, and earned him the nickname of the Sun King. These court ballets were very different than what we currently see as a full-length ballet. Nowadays, a ballet is performed over 2 or 3 acts and is usually around 3 hours long. The court ballets of the 17th century, however, were much longer, known as ballet d'entrée, referring to the small divisions or entries that the larger ballet was broken up into. These productions were extremely extravagant and lasted many, many hours. The Ballet of the Night, for example, consisted of 43 separate entries, each of those divided into 4 vigils. The the entire thing lasting over 12 hours, spanning the entire evening, and culminating when Apollo brings the morning sun with the dawn. At literal dawn. These were not one-off performances either. This particular ballet was performed twice a week for a month. In order to create these works, Louis brought together many different artists, from composers and fashion designers to poets to write the stories. One artist brought to court was a composer-choreographer named Jean-Baptiste Lully, who worked closely with the king's personal dance instructor, Pierre Beauchamp, to create these performances. Beauchamp is credited with setting the 5 basic positions of the feet that we still use in ballet today. He also created a notation system for writing ballet, much the way that you write music with notes, except using lines to designate different movements of the body. Through their collaboration, the two would create a new type of performance, the opera ballet, a form of lyric theater consisting of singing and dancing presented by professional dancers instead of the aristocracy. And in 1661, in a room in the Louvre, he established the first ballet school, the Royal Academy of Dance, where he tasked 13 of the most experienced dance masters with setting the standards for teaching and training dancers. And then in 1669, Louis created l'Académie d'Opéra in order to produce opera ballets and comedy ballets, another form of performance that Beauchamp had a hand in. This time in collaboration with the playwright Molière. A comedy ballet was a play with dance interludes, the precursor to the modern musical. Louis also took a starring role in many of these productions. But by the time the king was in his early 30s, his large appetite was catching up with him. Legend has it that around this time, the overweight king was no longer able to execute an entrecote, where you jump in the air and you beat your legs twice. So his dancing master removed one of the beats, creating the Royale, named for the king. Whether or not this is true, Louis made his farewell performance in one of Molière's comedy ballets in 1670 at the age of 32. And as a side note, to this day, many professional dancers retire in their early 30s due to the strain that ballet puts on your body. Around this time, Louis appointed Lully as the new head of the Academy of Opera. And as ballet transitioned into being performed by commoners, Lully would transform the school into the Paris Opera Ballet, the world's oldest ballet company, which still exists today. Lully is also credited with bringing women to the stage, with his 1681 production of Le Triomphe de l'Amour, featuring the first professional female dancer, Mademoiselle de La Fontaine. The trio of Molière's words, Lully's music, and Beauchamp's choreography would define the beginnings of ballet, as they created works to be enjoyed and performed by the king. And Louis played a large part in making that happen. He wanted to make France a country admired not only for its military might, but also for its artistic achievement. And his investment into the arts did just that, as French fashion, etiquette, and dance became the popular culture across royal courts of Europe. If it hadn't been for Louis XIV, ballet probably would have remained a social dinner dance for aristocrats who would elegantly walk around. And it very well could have been resigned to history as yet another Baroque dance that fell out of fashion, instead of becoming an art form that's practiced worldwide nearly 400 years later. Were he alive today, I imagine that Louis XIV would be confused by the modern stereotype of ballet as dainty and dancers as frail creatures, as nothing could be further from the truth then or now. The art form takes immense power and control. And while today it sees dancers performing feats of athleticism that were probably well beyond the wildest imaginations of those who shaped its beginnings, at one point in time, ballet was a key part of controlling the political sphere of an entire country, spreading propaganda and creating a reputation of cultural excellence. For early access, access to my notes, and help me figure out what topic to tackle next, check out my Patreon, linked below. Thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you soon for another video as I tackle another story from the stage.